as we continue to look at Egyptian art, we will see what may appear to be an obsession with death. But also, this is just what has been best preserved. For the Egyptians, death is just the beginning of a new life in the underworld, or afterlife. We see it in art so much because there were rituals that had to be performed to ensure someone got into the afterlife, preserving their immortality. So basically, we see a lot of images that depict instructions on how to prepare the body and how to prepare oneself for this process. We also see images that celebrate this new life. Now, in Egyptian religious concepts, there is a Ka, and the Ka is an essential part of Egyptian religion. The Ka is the life force, or the spirit. The Ka lived on after the death of the body. The Ka remained on earth to receive offerings. Another aspect of the spirit was the Aka. This is the part of the person that went to the afterlife and lived with the gods. This, of course, is a simplistic understanding of their religion, but that's what we're going to go with for now. So the body had to be preserved through mummification, and mummification was to ensure that the Ka had a body to live in the afterlife. Although the body is dead in this life, it would be used in the afterlife. So the Ka would actually live there after the body died. Now, in case a mummy is damaged or stolen or anything happens, an artist sculpts the likeness of the deceased to provide a home for the Ka. Priests would place mummies, statues, supplies, furnishings that the Ka might need in the afterlife in tombs, particularly, of course, elite tombs. During the early dynastic period, tombs were most commonly called mastabas. So a mastaba is a flat one-story building with slanted walls. It has a flat top. It's erected above an underground burial chamber. It's usually made of mud brick originally. Sometimes later they make them with cut stone. The Ka statue is sealed within the sirdab, which is the small chamber, and there's a chapel in front of that. Mourning relatives could come to this chapel and leave offerings. There's also a vertical shaft that drops down from the top of the mastaba down to the actual burial chamber. The mummy inside of a sarcophagus or a stone coffin is surrounded by grave goods. Here the burial chamber is sealed off after the body is put inside. Now, in some cases, these mastabas had several burial chambers to accommodate the whole family. So here's the basic design of the mastaba. You could actually have burial chambers shooting off in several directions underground to accommodate a bigger family. And again, it just kind of depends on the wealth of the family. The next period we're going to talk about is the Old Kingdom. So we've been talking about the early dynastic period really up until now, and giving our kind of introduction to Egypt. But the next period is the Old Kingdom. Now, Old Kingdom is really when mainstream Egyptian culture takes over the kingdom. This is a time of political stability. It's also a time of climate changes. This causes droughts and insect plagues. It's an era of expanding wealth of the pharaohs and their families. And this is when we start to see the great tombs. Kings or pharaohs are the great patrons of the arts. Also, government officials are art patrons, and we even had some tombs decorated. They would even have some tombs decorated with elaborate carvings. Now, during the Old Kingdom, tombs were often grouped together in a necropolis, or a city of the dead. The land of the dead is thought to be in the direction of the setting sun. So the city of the dead was usually in the edge of the desert on the west bank of the Nile. There are two Old Kingdom necropolises that we will look at. One is Saqqara and the other one is Giza. The earliest known monumental architecture in Egypt was commissioned by King Djaucer. He ruled from about 2681 to 2662 BCE. Djaucer's funerary complex at Saqqara was designed by Djaucer's prime minister, Imhotep. He is the first architect in history known by name. We know his name because his name is carved into the base of Djoser's Ka statue in the funerary temple. Amenhotep originally planned Djoser's tomb as a single-story mastaba, but later they decided to enlarge it. What they did basically produced a stepped pyramid. It's a stacked 6 mastaba-like buildings on top of each other in decreasing size. The result kind of recalls a ziggurat form, but it differs. The design is meant to be a stairway to the stars and to the sun god Ra. Djoser's stepped pyramid originally was faced with a veneer, which just means kind of like a front, of limestone, with a 92-foot shaft descending from the original mastaba enclosed within the structure. Adjacent to the funerary temple is where priests performed the final rituals for the king's mummy. This funerary temple was also used for the continuing worship of the dead king. So it's actually a complex rather than just one building. So you can see here in this layout here, we have the step pyramid here, and then we have this kind of funerary complex that surrounds the main building. East of the step pyramid, there would have been chapels, palaces with courtyards, and other structures. They would have, of course, been exquisitely carved, but now they are filled with debris. Now, this area here in this, what we call the Sed Festival Courtyard, was used to demonstrate the pharaoh's fitness to rule. So the pharaoh had to complete these Sed rituals every 13 years of a pharaoh's reign. And it would take place here in this courtyard. A pharaoh would have to run on a special track to prove that he was still strong and full of life. At the end, the pharaoh would be reaffirmed and recrowned again as the king of Egypt and the 2 lands. Now, one of the things here is, remember that the Ka goes on and it lives here on earth after your body is dead. So your Ka goes to the next life and your Ka stays here. That's why you have to have all these funeral goods and stuff like that. So your Ka is sitting there for eternity, just hanging out. Supposedly your relatives are supposed to come and give you offerings, and here's that funerary temple where your relatives can come and give you offerings. Now here at Djoser's tomb, this is where his Ka statue would be placed. Now Djoser didn't want to be bored in his afterlife, and he wanted to make sure that his family was still coming around and bringing him offerings, because if not, he was going to haunt them. He had a lot of haunting to do. So what he had Imhotep do is drill 2 holes into that wall, this wall right here, so that he could see, his statue would be here, and he could see what was going on in his funerary temple. So he would be able to see who's bringing in offerings and catch up on the good gossip and stuff like that. I'm not going to talk a lot about the pyramids because I know you have videos on them, but just kind of really briefly, I want to talk about sort of the evolution of how do we get from the step pyramid to the pyramids, but I know your video kind of covers that as well. So we just looked at Saqqara. Giza is that other Old Kingdom, it's actually much more well-known Old Kingdom funerary complex. It's in modern-day Cairo. So this is Egypt's most famous funerary structures, the 3 pyramids of Giza. They were built by the pharaohs Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure. They're made of granite and limestone, and they were built to commemorate the pharaohs who commissioned them. Now the sites are going to be very carefully planned to follow the sun's east-west path, and there's going to be funerary temples next to each temple. And each funerary temple is connected to a valley temple on the bank of the Nile by a causeway or an elevated road. So basically what happens is when the pharaoh dies, his body was carried by a boat across the Nile from the royal palace to the valley temple, where the ceremonies were performed, then carried up a causeway to the funerary temple and placed in the chapel, presented with offerings by the family, basically food and drink, and then the priest performed more rituals, and then finally the body could go to the burial chamber. Now the pyramid evolved from a step pyramid. Instead of having that kind of stepped pyramid look, we have smooth angled sides, and these are created by a smooth veneer of polished limestone. This may have been slanted to represent the sun's rays. We have seen inscriptions on the walls of the pyramids, tombs that tell about the deceased king climbing up the rays to join the sun god. Now, what I really want to talk about is the changes we see in the interior. We don't have the mastaba structure inside. So when we had the step pyramid, it was really kind of a natural evolution. We had the mastaba, and then it was like they covered the mastaba with the step pyramid, but now we don't have that anymore. Instead, you descend through a bunch of shafts or passageways with the burial chamber within the pyramid, not below ground. There's a bunch of false chambers and doors to confuse tomb robbers. Now, just really briefly, when you build a pyramid, this is going to be a huge undertaking. You need a huge labor force. Sometimes they use slaves. More often, they would hire workers, and workers would be paid as tribute. So basically what would happen is each village would be required to send a certain number of workers to work for a certain amount of time. So it's pretty much a way of them paying their taxes, or it could be viewed as maybe like a community building project. Now, they needed to have places to feed and house these people, and this is actually where a lot of the research or Egyptian archaeology is being done today, is around the pyramids. There's not a lot of left inside the pyramids because they have been so heavily looted, but around the pyramids we have all these kind of structures that we can learn a lot of information about how the pyramids were built. Okay, so you can watch those videos to learn more about the pyramids. So one of the pyramids here at Giza was built for Khafra. And I bring that up because we are going to talk about his sculpture. This is the Great Sphinx, also in Giza. You can see the pyramid here, one of the pyramids here in the background. So it's on the same site. We think that it may have been a portrait of Khafra, but that is still debated. It is a colossal monument. It is much more a monument than anything else. It is made of sandstone. It's about 65 feet tall, 221 feet long, 20 feet wide, and it's located behind the Valley Temple at Giza. So we have the head of a human, maybe this one looks like Khafra, with the body of a crouching lion. This is meant to be a symbol of power, permanence, and immortality. This unwavering, stable, strong, dominating the landscape monument / sculpture. So the Sphinx has been identified as Khafra. Not all scholars agree on that, but a lot of them have. And the scholars that do think that it is Khafra, they base it off this image. They think that this image looks like the Great Sphinx, and that's how they make the comparison and think that it's Khafra.